Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Reaction Show. My name is Andrew Velez. I'm here with my co-host, Mr. Joel Dells. This is episode number 29 of the Fantasy Reaction Show. We are here after Sunday Night Football, where we just watched the Jacksonville Jaguars get absolutely waxed by the number one seeded Baltimore Ravens. Before we get into that Sunday Night Football game, Mr. Dells, talk to me. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing good. I do have my Zach Wilson is good shirt on. I say it's going to be the
Little
last time I wear it
irony.
every time I wear it. But yeah, had to start the show a little bit of a lie. That was a tough game for New York. But first week of the fantasy playoffs for a lot of you guys. Let us know how you did in the comments. If you're in the live stream right now, let us know if you guys won first round going on to the semifinals. Unfortunately, half the panel here moved on. Half the panel did not. I was able to pull it off, represent for the fantasy reaction. Unfortunately, Drew had a pretty big lead going into this. Right, you're up. How many you were up going into this week?
15 points.
Okay, my
Nothing
apologies.
crazy.
Wasn't that crazy? Wasn't that crazy? Up 15. Then he ran into Jared Goff, who had a big day. T. Higgins had a big day. Deontay, he ran into a bit of a gauntlet. But shout out to our guy G, first time making the fantasy championship in 10 years. So listen, if you're out there, you've been in the league for a decade, however long, you haven't got to that championship. One of our good friends, this is his first time making the chip in a decade. So stay with it. Your time will come. But yeah, doing good. It's going to be a fun 2 weeks coming up.
In a league where we don't have to start a tight end, my opponent thought that David Njoku would just be a great play
Start
this
of the week.
Son of a
Start
bitch.
of the week.
The guy knew what the hell was going on. A great play by him. He just outperformed me this week. It hurt. We're going to talk about some of the duds this week.
I was going through the duds, and I was like, this is insane. It was just like Drew's player.
I texted Joel before the show started. I said, listen, if I do the duds, nothing good's going to come out of it. I need you to take one for the team. I need you to do the duds this week because we're going to talk about Dak. We're going to talk about Derek Henry. We're going to talk about Breece Hall. Tough week for your boy. It is what it is, but we're doing all right. Can't complain too much. In one league, you fall. Another league, you can rise, which is why the name of the show today is going to be the ups and downs of fantasy football, because you guys hear it every single week. I'm riding on a high. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. That's the duo to have. Jalen Hurts, a guy who's been near untouchable in fantasy football all year long. And then you have a week like today where Derrick Henry, who has been a top 5 running back all year, he goes and he drops you with 3. Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb, if not for that garbage time rushing touchdown, the two of them would have combined for under 15 fantasy points. CeeDee Lamb, of course, ends up saving face, but Dak Prescott looks miserable. And then the ups, of course, like I just mentioned. In one league, I may be out, but in another league, here I am. I'm going back to the championship. It's my 3rd year in a row going to the championship in that league. So, I was pretty bummed about not making it in our league. Of course, it's our close friends. A lot of trash talk is thrown between us, but I lost to one of my favorite guys in the league, so I could live with that. But then in my other league, of course, I run it there. So the ups and the downs of fantasy football, you got to take your highs with the highs, but you can't let them get too high. Can't let your lows get too lows, as my great friend Mr. Dells always likes to tell me. But let's talk about some Sunday Night Football, Mr. Dells, before we get on to our studs and duds of the week. We just watched Baltimore kind of kick the Jaguars' ass, 23-7. Jaguars, where they left some points on the board, to be fair, in that first half. McManus did not have it today. A couple missed field goals. They got into the red zone a good amount of times and just weren't able to get any points on the board. Were able to score that bomb touchdown to Jamal Agnew. Shout out to our guy Brett. All my homies love Jamal Agnew. That was actually the play that put me in to the fantasy championship in my other league. That was pretty awesome. But outside of that, I mean, the Ravens really were in cruise control with this game. Lamar Jackson made some excellent plays, was a force on the ground, 12 carries, 97 yards. He was awesome on the ground, almost 8 a carry. He was fantastic. Through the air, did have an interception, threw for just under 200 yards, did have a touchdown to Likely early on in the game. But he made some nice plays. I mean, his pocket presence. Who has better pocket presence than Lamar Jackson? Maybe Mahomes. I think he might be the only one that I will give that benefit of the doubt over Lamar. And even still, Lamar Jackson is just so quick, so calm, so poised in the pocket. And he's just impossible to take down, that when you get a sack on Lamar, you really need to give yourself a pat on the back, because he's so slippery. He's able to evade just as good as anybody else in the league. He really is one of one in that regard. but really a one-sided matchup. The Baltimore Ravens continue their pursuit of securing the number 1 seed in the AFC. But let me hear some of your takeaways from this game, Mr. Dells, outside of the fact of Jaguars defense still is not good.
Yeah, it was the Ravens on the ground. 40 carries, 250 yards in total. You mentioned it. Lamar goes for nearly 100. Keaton Mitchell, prayers to him, had a pretty
For sure.
gruesome knee injury. You know, obviously we're hoping for the best, maybe hyperextension, sprained ACL, MCL, but it didn't look good on the TV. They didn't show a replay. But then Gus Edwards steps up, goes 16 for 58. Justice Hill, a little bit of explosiveness too. So unfortunately for Keaton Mitchell, probably going to be missing the rest of the season. It's a guess, but the way the knee injury looked, he ended up getting carted off. So probably not going to see him, but we have a job to do. So we have to talk about Gus Edwards. He definitely gets a boost here because these last couple of weeks, we've seen his snaps go down. We've seen his carries go down because Keaton Mitchell had looked so electric. But now with Keaton out, Gus Edwards is going to be seen probably minimum 15 touches going forward. We know around the goal line, he's always been that guy, but now he's going to get more work between the 20s and then, of course, on early downs, which Keaton Mitchell was taken away from there. And the other thing that was the most surprising was this receiving core from the Ravens, because coming into this week, we saw some flashes from Odell. We've had back-to-back weeks of Zay Flowers having great games. And it was really just Isaiah Likely, the only one who showed up. You mentioned the touchdown.
Yep.
He also had another crazy catch over two
Insane.
defenders. The play, Lamar breaks the sack, goes to the right, throws it across the field, and Isaiah Likely goes up and makes a big play. He was the only one that showed up. 5 for 70, a touchdown, because you look at Odell, 1 catch, 14 yards. Zay Flowers, 1 catch, 7 yards, 3 and 2 targets apiece. They were not used how I was expected. I thought that, first of all, this game would be a bit more high scoring than what it ended up being. The Jaguars really weren't able to move the ball that well, not consistently. At least they did have a couple of turnovers, and McManus missed some field goals. So maybe it shouldn't have been 23-7, but the Ravens were in command of this game basically the whole way. But I still was surprised that we didn't see more from those receivers. I know a lot of people were relying on them. Then the Jaguar side of things, another week where Calvin Ridley gets screwed out of a touchdown. I thought that was pretty clean, that it was in the end zone. I know the on-air referee said it should be a touchdown. Of course, the referees on the field said it wasn't. It was pretty close, but I thought that one shot with his knee down, possession of the ball, would have been a touchdown. But then you look on the other side, just Agnew was really the only one worth starting from the receiving core. 70 yards and a touchdown. Zay Jones, decent. Calvin Ridley, another game where he disappoints. So this Ravens defense continues to dominate. Lamar Jackson has another finish within the top 10. But these receivers, I think we were counting on to down the stretch maybe become flex pieces, probably once again look like they're kind of more of a boomer bust play.
Now, I want to ask you a question because Trevor Lawrence, he did not look good in this game, not even a little bit. Very careless with the football. You mentioned fumbling the ball a couple of times. One where the ball simply just falls out of his hands. The other, he gets pressured, he gets sacked, and the ball pops out. But some throws that I looked at where just kind of sailing on him, just does not seem he didn't seem his most confident self. Now, do we pair that with the idea that Christian Kirk's not on the field, their lack of dynamic wide receivers now really is kind of taken out. They don't have their number one slot guy, their number one receiver for what's been the majority of the season. It seemed as if this offense really just lacked some kind of juice. Now, are we going to just simply rely that on the skill position players, or at what point are we going to start putting some more blame on the shoulders of a Trevor Lawrence, where I'm looking at him today specifically saying he did not have a good game? That is how confident I can feel about this. I can talk, I can joke, I can troll about the Jaguars defense. They were not the reason why the Jaguars were unable to win this game. Holding the Ravens to 23 points, that is not a bad showing by the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. It's the fact that you're turning the ball over, you're missing these field goals that are just allowing extra possessions to go to the Ravens without you putting up any points. And when you're playing one of the top teams in the AFC, to me, it becomes impossible to etch out a win against them, especially when you're playing as sloppy as the Jaguars were today.
Yeah, we just got news. Keaton Mitchell does appear to be a season-ending knee injury. So, yeah, I mean, this is something we're in December, probably going to impact the start of next season. You start thinking, of course, torn ACL, MCL, something like that. But getting back to Trevor Lawrence, I think there's a few different things that go into it. The offensive line, number one, has not been really good all season long. Another game where I thought the Ravens got pressure pretty consistently. You look at the weapons, just go through the box score. I mean, it's Jamal Agnew, Zay Jones, Calvin Ridley, who's, I think it's safe to say, has been a disappointment up to this point. I don't know if they're going to extend him. They did trade a second-round pick for him, which I had some condition on it. I don't remember if the condition had to do with an extension. I felt like it might. I don't know if they're going to extend him because so far it hasn't really been a great pair. Trevor Lawrence, Luke Farrell, Evan Ingram, Parker Washington. I think another issue is just kind of lack of weapons. These guys are fine, but I would like to get Trevor Lawrence a real number one. They tried with Calvin Ridley. He feels like more of a two to me this season, as he's been more on the outside, kind of in that X role, hasn't really performed up to what a lot of people were expecting, or at least some of the last time we saw him in Atlanta. And then it's also on Trevor Lawrence. You know, he came out as a generational prospect, and I think it's safe to say he hasn't lived up to it. I think he's still been a really good quarterback, but at this point in time in Andrew Luck's career, like I feel like everyone was very comfortable saying he's locked quarterback, elite quarterbacks in football. We haven't really seen that with Trevor Lawrence. You know, he's, I think, still pretty comfortably in that top 10, but he's definitely closer to 10 than he is 5, which I think some people were expecting a leap from the Jaguars. I even thought coming into the season they had a chance at the number 1 seed. If they make that type of jump, that would be on the back of Trevor Lawrence, and maybe he could get his conversation into that top 5 type of with those type of peers among his quarterback group. But it hasn't been the case this season. You know, he just hasn't been as sharp, and he's dealt with some injuries. You know, he's had the ankle injury, he's had the knee injury. So I don't think it's just one thing. I do think collectively as a whole, the pieces could be better. Weapons room, the offensive line could be better. Trevor Lawrence could be more healthy. But I do think it's fair to criticize his play because his standard is still so high. You know, I think Trevor Lawrence has the ability to be one of the most talented quarterbacks in the league. He's just leaving a lot on the field right now.
Last 2 weeks, we understand that he is dealing with this ankle injury, but he looked fine running to me today and last week versus the Browns.
Yep.
But versus the Browns, he was turning the ball over against the Baltimore Ravens tonight, turning the ball over. Just honestly, I'm looking at Trevor, and there's moments in this game where he can sharpen up and play a cleaner game that can allow Jacksonville to be in these games more so than they are. That game versus the Browns definitely was closer than what it should have been in terms of Trevor Lawrence turning the ball over, Jacksonville's defense doing a good enough job against Joe Flacco and company to get the ball back and give him another opportunity. Unfortunately, Trevor just wasn't able to overcome and get them to that W at the end of the day. Fantasy football wise, he saved face last week with 20 fantasy points. This week finishes with just under 15. I don't know if it's Trevor Lawrence plays good defense. Anticipate that he won't have the greatest of games because the 3 games before that, Trevor Lawrence played against Tennessee, played against Houston. He went and lit up the box scores. But then that game versus San Francisco, he goes and doesn't even score 5 fantasy points. So to me, that becomes a concern when I'm trying to win a championship. I also have Trevor Lawrence in that league that I'm going to the championship in. This has been my quarterback, and he's been too inconsistent for me to feel overly confident with him. And a guy like Joe Flacco who's coming off the couch and he's doing just as good of a job, if not better, than Trevor Lawrence in fantasy football. So that's where you want to talk about real life and fantasy. When you're playing up against a great matchup, Trevor Lawrence is not for sure locked and loaded. But in real life, also, that can translate because when we saw him against Baltimore, when we saw him against Cleveland, when we saw him against San Fran, he was not the level of quarterback that we saw against Tennessee and Houston, one of the weaker pass defenses. So it's just something to note, something to take looking forward because they do have Tampa Bay. Carolina, who we mentioned, is a stingy pass defense. And then obviously not relevant to fantasy football, but week 18, they do have Tennessee. So it'll be interesting to see how the Jaguars close it up and how Trevor Lawrence closes the season, because last year, the reason why everyone was so high on Trevor Lawrence was because of how amazing he was to end the season. Of course, in the playoffs, did start his game with 4 INTs, but finished with 4 touchdowns and was able to win the game. This time around, we haven't seen him be consistent at all throughout this season. So it's been pretty hard to trust what we've been seeing out of Trevor. And I'm with you. I think he is a top 10 quarterback, but most definitely closer to 10. Like Dak Prescott has comfortably been better than Trevor Lawrence. And I don't think anybody coming into the season had Dak Prescott over Trevor Lawrence. And I feel very confident saying that. Brock Purdy is not as talented as Trevor Lawrence, but I'd be damned to say if Brock Purdy hasn't been playing better than a Trevor Lawrence. It's like that's what becomes so difficult when it comes to these top 10 conversations, because the talent really is what allows people to trump over everything else, which I'm fine with. But at the same time, production is king. And those two guys have been the king of production. And that goes perfectly into our studs and duds because one of those guys acted the role of an MVP and the other, unfortunately, did not. But let's get right into it, Mr. Dells. Studs and duds of week 15. We're going to start it off with the fact that there were 3 quarterbacks. I think 4, actually. 4 quarterbacks that were backup quarterbacks that ended up being in our top 10 this week.
The top 10
Quarterback
is
1.
insane.
No, it's ridiculous. Quarterback 1, Jared Goff. Let's get it out the way. The Broncos got their ass kicked. Jared Goff was phenomenal. 5 touchdowns, just under 300 yards. Your quarterback 1. He did that on my birthday party. That was pretty fucked up of him. I wasn't happy with it.
Oh, drop a happy birthday for Drew. I meant to say at the beginning of the episode. I was thinking that I was like, gotta say happy birthday to Drew. Drop a happy birthday. His birthday is gonna be Monday. I don't know if you guys are watching now on Monday, but drop a happy birthday for my guy.
Appreciate that, bud. But he was pretty damn great, and it hurt to see because we've been playing awesome. Our defense had been fantastic, and we couldn't stop a nosebleed yesterday, whether it was the run, whether it was the pass. I told y'all Sam Laporta was going to eat. He goes and gets 2 touchdowns on us. Was it 2 or 3? It might have been 3.
3, I think. Didn't he
I
have
was
the
going
one
to say
right at the end?
I kind of turned it off. The night was ruined. I was just like, get this off my screen. But Goff, of course, was amazing. Your quarterback 1. Quarterback 2, Baker Mayfield. He had himself a ball game, 4 touchdowns, almost 400 passing yards against the Packers.
Crazy.
Did lose a fumble, but good enough to be your quarterback 2 on the week. Aiden O'Connell, quarterback 3 this week. After Thursday night, we spoke about that with the ass-kicking Vegas gave to the Chargers. Quarterback 4, probably the MVP of the league, Brock Purdy, 242 yards, 4 touchdowns, another game where he doesn't throw an INT. I get it. You're going up against the Cardinals, a bad defense, but you got to go out there and execute. And that's all this kid does. The respect that he has earned from all football fans, whether you hate him or not. And I say you hate him because you doubted the talent. You doubted who he can be on the football field. You need to acknowledge what he's doing. He most likely will be the MVP of the league. And that is mind-blowing to me. So credit to you, Brock. And that's your fantasy quarterback. I know you got some things to say.
By the way. I think it's fine that he's MVP. I know everyone wants to say it's system quarterback. If he didn't have X, Y, and Z, he wouldn't be this great. And it's like, yeah, but he's also like balling the fuck out. Like the touchdown he had to CMC where he rolls out to his left, resets, boom, just right in the money. CMC a little bit high, but CMC grabs his wide open. Like he's been making high-level throws all season long. So don't just take the narrative that's out there that, oh, it's just Kyle Shanahan and the weapons. Like, in my opinion, he's very comfortably better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Like they don't look like the same type of quarterback to me. Like Brock Purdy is way more consistent. He is way more accurate. I don't even care what the numbers say, whether you want to look at EPA or completion percentage or compare their numbers. Eye test to me, Brock Purdy looks like the far better quarterback. I think he's elevating all these pieces. We're seeing Ayuk have a breakout season. Debo still getting his. Kittle still getting his. And of course you have CMC, who Brock Purdy himself said should be the MVP. Everyone's having great seasons with Brock Purdy there. They're the best team in football. So just because the weapons and coach is great doesn't mean he doesn't deserve it. He's been playing great football.
After today, because I know Sleeper doesn't update theirs until tomorrow, just under, if not right over, 3,800 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 7 INTs. He has been a man on a mission. And I'm okay with him winning MVP too. He's going to have the best team in the NFL. He's leading one of the best offenses in the NFL. He's played one of the cleanest games at the quarterback position of any quarterback in the league. I mean, come on. Why disrespect him because he doesn't fit your eye test? To me, that's ridiculous, and you need to acknowledge what he's been doing. Another backup, Gardner Minshew, top 5. He goes 215, 3 touchdowns. 20 fantasy points, not the best of weeks for fantasy football at all. The fact that 20-point performance is able to get you into the top 5 speaks to the level of play we saw this week. But hey, credit to Gardner, was able to do a job yesterday. Derek Carr, quarterback 6. This was good to see, beating the Giants. People were very critical of Derek Carr coming in, but he's been playing through some injuries. He's got 3 busted ribs. He had a good performance today, finishes as your quarterback 6. Jake Browning. He's been another. If you were in a 2-quarterback league, you lost Burrow, you lost Kirk. You were lucky enough to pick up Jake Browning. This guy has been pretty money for the last 3 weeks. 26 fantasy points, 25 fantasy points. And this past week, 20 fantasy points. He's been a model of consistency, and he looked pretty sluggish to start the game, but then finishes with 324, 2 touchdowns. I mean, what else is there to say other than he is pretty consistent and solid?
He is. No, these backup quarterbacks, typically you see them go down and everything goes to shit. But I think it just shows a lot about the offensive coaches we have right now, right? I don't think it's a coincidence that Kevin Stefanski, Joe Flacco is pretty good. Zach Taylor, Jake Brown is pretty good. I
Yep,
mean, even Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins were having moments in Minnesota with Kevin
true.
O'Connell, offensive coach. So you got to give credit to the guys out there performing. But I think it's, of course, a new wave of offensive coaches coming in, being able to pick up the playbook so quickly, having the scheme in place to find open guys and things aren't too difficult for them, being able to go through one read, two read, and move on. But yeah, these backup quarterbacks balled out today because I have some duds in here that we were expecting to have big performances, and I look at the top 10 guys, I'm like, oh shit, it's Aiden O'Connell and Jake Browning in the top 10.
Yeah. And then for the next 2 weeks of fantasy playoffs, he has Pittsburgh, he has Kansas City. Kansas City not the easiest of matchups, but we haven't seen Kansas City's defense be as dominant as it was early in the season. Not saying that it's not bad, not by any means, but it hasn't been that dominant force that we've seen early in the season. But regardless, I think Jake Browning's safe against Pittsburgh. Minnesota was the toughest defense that he faced in his stretch of games since taking over the lead job, and he played a pretty solid game. I can't say anything bad about Jake Browning. Top 8, Mr. Joe Flacco. I mean, the guy continues to ball out. Another one did not look good at the start, but as the game progressed, like they were trailing the Bears basically the entire game. Joe Flacco went and led a pretty impressive last couple of drives. Goes for almost 400 yards, 374, 2 touchdowns, 3 INTs, and still was able to finish as a top 8 quarterback. Lamar Jackson, we just spoke about. A lot of his work was through the ground. Like I mentioned, 12 carries, 97 yards, had a passing touchdown, finishes your 9th quarterback of the week. And Nick Mullins, number 10 quarterback. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me that Nick Mullins is a top 10 quarterback. But again, 303 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs. He had some moments. And really a lot of that was Jordan Addison making some nice plays. Also that play that he had to Jordan Addison in the red zone where he was able to get Addison that touchdown as well. That was a nice play from Mullins too. He had his moments, but overall, it was definitely it was like the ugliest great game that you could have seen out of these two quarterbacks. Jake kind of started off ugly, but closed out nice. And then the opposite side, Nick Mullins kind of was just all over the place throughout the entirety of the game. But it was exciting and it was fun to watch. But let's move on to the duds, Mr. Dells.
So first up, we just talked about him. Trevor Lawrence finishes as QB 20 on the week, 260 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Been very inconsistent week in and week out. We discussed him, but I think the biggest dub this week has to be Dak Prescott. Quarterback 28, 134 passing yards, one interception, 0 touchdowns. His worst performance since week 5 against San Francisco. You're one of them, but I'm sure there's a ton of people watching this who were riding on this Dak Hill for those last month, 6 weeks, 2 months, however long it's been, of him being damn near a top 5 quarterback, what felt like every single week. First round of the playoffs for most people out there. And he really does kill you, with a performance like this. QB 28 doesn't get much worse. These road splits are a bit worrisome. He has Miami next week, but if you look at his road splits, he's had 2 awesome games on the road. Finished as QB1 against the Chargers. I think we agree is one of the worst defenses in football. And then again in Philly, where he was a top 3 quarterback, another terrible defense. His 5 other road games, QB 29, QB 18, QB 25, QB 17, and QB 28 today. So like I mentioned, he's at Miami next weekend. The way Dak's been playing, there's no way you could sit him, but just something to remember if you somehow have like a Brock Purdy on your bench that you got late and you've just been rocking with 2 quarterbacks, these away splits are not the best for him. But then finishes week 17 home versus Detroit, which is something, of course, you should be all over. Anything to say about Dak Prescott on his kind of closing remarks on the season as we lay this fantasy season to rest for a good brother on the show?
It's more so the heartbreak that I experienced watching him just let my fantasy season go to shit. It hurt because I was one of the OG riders for Dak Prescott early in the season when people were throwing dirt on his name. I was there. I saw the vision. I saw what he was able to accomplish, and I said, you know what, Dak, I believe in you. You can be the one to lead me to the promised land. And I looked like a genius for several weeks. What was it from week 6 on? Going on almost 10 weeks now. And then for him to lay this dud on me when it matters most, it hurt. It hurt deep to the core. And if I talk about it a little bit more, I might get a little emotional. So let's move on, Mr. Dells, please.
So we'll
Do me the
move on.
favor.
I'll take my L on this one. Sam Howell. I thought he had a great matchup against the Rams, high scoring game, one of the highest over-unders of the week, and he is a big dud. QB 25, 100 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, second worst game of the season. Gets benched for Jacoby Brissett, and Brissett goes out there and outplays him just in the fourth quarter alone. Brissett goes 8 for 10, 124 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We see Terry McLaurin, who I was shitting on this past episode, saying you could probably cut him at this point, goes for over 100 yards and a touchdown. Ron Rivera came out and already said that Sam Howell is going to be the starter going forward. They do have the Jets next week, so I'd imagine his leash is probably pretty short because he gets benched in this game. Brissett looks so great, and now you're going up against a defense where Sam Howell has had sack problems. He's had some turnover problems. We know the Jets defense are capable of doing that. So I wouldn't be shocked if Jacoby Brissett ends up finishing next week. So Sam Howell's a pretty risky play next week. Justin Fields struggled to pass anything, really. I mean, complete less than 50% of his passes, only 196 total yards, a touchdown, 2 picks, also fumbled twice, but both recovered by the offense. Almost had that Hail Mary at the end that we were talking about when we were texting in the Pick a Side group chat that almost saved him. Darnell Mooney was this close. It would have been the play of the year. But Justin Fields struggled on the road against a tough Browns defense. Tua was quarterback 20 on the week. For real life, he was pretty fantastic, completing nearly 90% of his passes, 220 yards and a touchdown. Had a bomb touchdown to Jalen Waddle over DJ Reed, where Waddle just
that throw was sex. Oh,
it was right on the money. This is the best. I mean, we'll talk about Waddle later, but this is the best that Waddle looked, in my opinion, and probably all season long with Tyreek not there. Can you guess how many yards per play the Jets averaged on offense?
Yards per play. I'm gonna guess
yards per play.
1.2.
1.9.
Oh my God,
it was so bad. It was so bad. So Tua goes out for 220 and a touchdown, and I mean the game was over basically by the end of the first quarter. The Dolphins really didn't have to press anything because if this was a game where the opposing offense was able to score, the Dolphins were moving the ball with relative ease throughout the game. A couple other ones that were disappointing but didn't kill you. Kyler Murray, QB 17 in a tough matchup against San Francisco. He got banged up a bit in this game. I don't know if he looked like he just got hit in the balls, honestly. He was kind of grabbing it. He missed like 2 plays and came back in. And then Josh Allen, QB 15 in a game where the Bills scored 30-plus points. We're going to talk about the reason why Josh Allen was only quarterback 15 because there's a running back over there that had himself a career day. But he only had 7 completions. I couldn't tell you the last time a team had 7 completions and scored 30 points. The Bills were able to just kill them on the ground, and the completions did have for some pretty big ones. So those are the biggest duds of the week. But Dak Prescott, man, it was a great run.
It hurt me so badly. You have no idea. I'm watching this game, and I'm just like, all right, Bills are scoring. All right, it's inevitable. Dak and CD, they've been money all season long. I'm even waiting for Jake Ferguson to get going. Of course, he's been awesome. Nothing. CeeDee Lamb, he's lucky. He got saved by a rushing touchdown that I can't get mad at him. But I promise you I want to. Because they were not getting open. The pressure was too much. The Bills were getting after him, and they were clamping. It was a masterclass by the Bills. Let me say that first so people don't think, oh, you're just saying Dak stinks before you give the Bills credit. No, the Bills were all-world great today. But at the same time, you got to go out there and play some ball. And Dallas did not do that. And it starts with Dak Prescott, who did not look great today. And they should be celebrating because they clinched a playoff spot. But at the end of the day, they got their ass beat. And they're kind of showing their true colors. So let me not get too in my bag right now. Let's move on to the running back studs of week 15. Number 1, like I said, it's Christian McCaffrey. That's how it always should be. He's the best running back in fantasy football history. I don't care who you bring to me. They're not going out there and giving you 115 on the ground. They're not giving you 72 receiving on top of getting 1 rushing and 2 receiving touchdowns. They're not doing it. He is the best running back in the game, and Brock was trying to plead his case that CMC was the true MVP. Okay, I'm not upset. This guy is amazing, and he does everything on a football field at the best level. His blocking's great. His receiving is great. His rushing's great. He's strong. I mean, you can't ask for more of a running back than Christian McCaffrey. 41.7 fantasy points. He also is a big reason why I'm going to the chip, too. That's my guy. James Cook, another one of my guys. I mean, I always knew. Didn't I, Joel? Didn't I always know?
You were there.
James
Cook,
were there. 25 carries, 179 yards, a touchdown on the ground, a touchdown in the air. He could do no wrong against Dallas today. Every hole. He was shifty. He was breaking tackles. He was making people miss. He was the talent that I thought that he could be coming out. It was just a matter of opportunity. And finally, the Bills unleashed him. You saw Josh Allen say, hey, I feel like that joke of class project, I got an A, but I did nothing. I just was there for the ride. This was the James Cook show. RB2 on the week, phenomenal. RB3, this one hurts a little bit. Jahmyr Gibbs, you had to know, unfortunately. 11 carries, 100 yards, almost 10 a carry. Truly dominated us and gets 2 touchdowns, 1 in the air, 1 on the ground. RB3 on the week. Ty Chandler, great call by you, my friend. 23 carries, 132 yards, gets himself a touchdown. He was phenomenal from start to finish. The Cincinnati Bengals had no answer for him. He was effective. He was efficient. He looked dominant. Like sometimes you're just watching a game and you feel like this guy's got it. Watching Ty Chandler, he felt that way to me. RB5.
Do you think he took over? Real question about
Madison?
Ty Chandler, because we don't know. Madison didn't practice at all last week. Won't surprise me if he's out another week. But one of the biggest questions going into next week probably is going to be the health of Alexander Madison. To me, Ty Chandler looks so much better. That's not even close, but we don't know what Kevin O'Connell is going to say. Going forward, do you think he's taken over this backfield? Do you think Madison chips in, or is this just Chandler's job to have going forward?
I think that moving forward, Ty Chandler should be the lead back. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised to see Alexander Madison sprinkled in the way that Ty Chandler was. But for a good portion of the workload, I think that it should go to Ty Chandler. He looked the best that I've seen a Minnesota running back look this season. And he was careful with the ball. That's been a big issue of Minnesota's as well. Their running backs can't hold on to the ball, and he was doing exactly that. And it put them in a position to win. Unfortunately, they just did not catch the W. RB5. Kyren Williams, every single week you can anticipate this. 27 carries, 152, a touchdown. Had a 2-point conversion now. Fumbled twice. There was the drive after he fumbled where they rode with Royce Freeman the entire time. Not the entire time. I think it was just the last play before they scored. Ironically, that was the play that Kyren Williams ends up getting into the end zone, but then fumbles again later in the game. McVay still went to him, still showed that he trusted his back. I love to see that because Kyren has been one of the best offensive pieces for the Rams, and seeing him fumble twice, and I was wondering what McVay would do, but they still showed love to the guy. He was fantastic, finished with a great performance. RB6, Rachaad White. I feel like there's a lot of names that we say week in and week out. I mean, Rachaad White is one of those. He's kind of giving off Todd Gurley vibes where he has touchdowns at the end of the game, and he's just sitting. He's not going for it. He's just taking the W. Respect that, because even with doing that, he's still a top 6 guy. 89 rushing on 21 carries, 2 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown. He was fantastic. Devin Singletary, one of the big reasons why the Texans were able to celebrate victory, will be able to celebrate victory Monday. 26 carries, 121 on the ground, 4 catches for 49 yards. Had the big play where one got called back, but then the other where he was able to put his team in field goal range. Devin Singletary was awesome. The biggest surprise here, your guy, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 13
Never
carries.
wrong, just early.
Never wrong, just early. 4 catches, 4 targets, 64 yards, and a touchdown. And that touchdown might I add. Goodness. High Points comes down, snags that. That was very cool to see. Raheem Mostert sets the Dolphins franchise record for most touchdowns in a season. Could have had 3, finishes with 2. He has 20 at this point in time. 15 carries, 42 yards. Wasn't that efficient, but 2 touchdowns. Has himself the record-setting day. Good for him. And finishing out this top 10, Mr. James Conner, who finishes with 18 fantasy points, 86 yards on the ground, and a touchdown. He had himself a ball game against one of the league's best defenses.
Running back duds. The biggest one of the week, Bijan Robinson. I don't know what happened here. He got Arthur Smith.
You were clowning
in my
me.
opinion.
You were clowning me, and I should have. What are the odds of that, huh? Oh, Bijan Robinson. Nice call, bro. Either which way, my start of the weeks were garbage. So go ahead.
7 carries for 11 yards, 1 catch for 3 yards, also fumbled. 0.4 fantasy points against the lowly Panthers. This was tough to watch because the previous 4 weeks he had at least 15 touches, 3 finishes in the top 13. This week, he played just 59% of snaps, the lowest of the season. He got benched after that fumble I mentioned. How are you benching Bijan Robinson? We just talked about Kyron Williams fumbling twice, but he's 10 times better than Royce Freeman. So you keep putting Kyron Williams out there. Bijan Robinson might be 20 times better than Tyler Algier. But no,
Respect
Algier's
Tyler
getting the work.
Algier.
It's gross, man. I thought I was starting to give Arthur Smith some credit. I thought he maybe started to figure this thing out. But we're going to talk about Bijan, and we're going to talk about everyone else on this Falcons offense because none of their good players got the ball. That's probably why they lost to the Panthers, who got their second win of the season. You score only 7 points. Breece Hall finishes as RB 59, one of the worst games of the season for Breece. 6 carries for 12 yards, but really what killed him was the lack of receiving work. Had 4 straight games of 5+ receptions, but just one today. We're going to talk about Breece. We're talking about Garrett a little bit later, too, because next week they play Washington. But can you trust Breece Hall? We don't know who's playing quarterback. Zach Wilson leaves for dehydration. Then it's a head injury, but not a concussion. Then it is a concussion. Of course, Rodgers can technically come back, but we've been eliminated from the playoffs, so he's probably not coming back. So you're looking at Zach Wilson or probably Trevor Siemian. So great matchup next week against Washington, but can you trust Breece Hall in any matchup going forward?
I'm going to say yes. I think going up against Washington, that's all day. We just saw what the Rams were able to do against them. Kyron Williams finishes as a top 5 back. Now, is it easier to scheme up against the Jets? 10,000%. But what shocked me the most was that they did not use Breece in the passing game. And that's where we've seen Breece make a lot of his money so far, or these last couple of weeks. So for him to get almost no looks is insane to me. So I think going up against Washington, though, that's a safe play.
Next up, though, Derrick Henry, running back 43 on the week. 3 straight
When's
weeks
it
of
end,
top 10. I know. 3 straight weeks of a top 10 running back finish. He was a top 6 back coming into this week. He wasn't playing as much. Like, he was always hovering around 50% snap share, but he just kept producing, getting touchdowns or yards on the ground. He's the first person. Ryan McDowell tweeted this out. First player in NFL history to have 20 touches and less than 15 yards. I don't even know how that's possible against this Texans defense that was really allowing basically everyone to eat. We saw Breece Hall have a huge game the week before. We saw Garrett Wilson have a big week the game before. But Derrick Henry, it just didn't happen. He, to me, didn't have the same explosiveness. There was one play where they put him up in like Wildcat, and he just like ran into the back of the line with just, it looked like he was running out there with a walker. Wasn't great, but 2 good matchups against Seattle and Houston coming up. I do think he bounces back. Saquon Barkley, RB 40 on the week, 37 total yards on just 11 touches. He was averaging around 22 touches prior to this. So it was a really ugly game from the Giants offense. DeVito got sacked 7 times. They were terrible on third down. They had less than 200 total yards of offense. The Packers game feels like a bit of an outlier to me for this Giants offense. You have Darren Waller come back, which is good to see. And you do have Philly and the Rams the next 2 weeks, who have been 2 of the tougher matchups for opposing running backs. You still continue to start Saquon because he's been one of the more consistent running backs when he's on the field. But just, of course, with this offense, there could be some down games. Javonte Williams, RB 47 on the week, just 27 rushing yards, has New England next week. Not excited about that. Najee Harris, RB 69. This is a great spot for Najee. Really bad Colts defense, but just 12 carries for 33 yards. I was considering him for start of the week. Fumbled in this game too. Just a bad game from the Steelers offense. 216 total yards and 13 points. A couple of others that maybe weren't duds, but a bit disappointing. Jerome Ford, worst game since week 8, but does have Houston next week, who's been beatable outside of eliminating Derrick Henry today. You had Tony Pollard finish as RB 31, but terrible offensive day all around. Then Austin Eckler, RB 30, lost 21-63. This game was done basically before it started, so you can't really point it just at Eckler, but we know he's had his troubles this year.
Tough day for fantasy football where the greats just lay duds, especially in the biggest moment of the season. So if you guys are hurting, just understand I'm hurting too, all right? We take this shit serious, so at least you can see the pain in someone else's eyes. That being said, let's move on to the wide receiver studs of the week. Jordan Addison, back from the dead. It's funny what happens when Jettis is back on the field and what the attention that he takes away from Mr. Addison. 6 catches, 111 yards, 2 touchdowns, good enough to finish as your wide receiver 1 on the week. Some great plays too. That first touchdown where he was able to just snag it right before it hit the ground, and then his second touchdown where he just kind of high points the ball and is able to make a nice play. Credit to Addison for getting to the wide receiver 1 finish. Number 2 on the week, your boy, Mr. Jalen Waddle, finally, another one back from the dead. 8 catches, 142 yards, and a bomb touchdown. One of the prettier balls I've seen this season, honestly. But at the same time, Waddle, without Tyreek Hill, we finally see him explode. Do you think this will translate moving forward with Tyreek Hill on the field? We know the talent that Jalen Waddle has. Now, we feel, or I have felt as at least, that this offense has been catering a little bit too much to Tyreek and not enough for Jalen Waddle, who's still a dominant receiver in his own right. But do you think that this is a good thing, a sign for good things to come?
Shit, I hope so. I mean, last week it felt like Tyreek Hill gets hurt middle of the game and Mike McDaniel kind of scrambles to figure out how to run their offense. He has a whole week to prep where Tyreek Hill was pretty 50-50. At least to us, he was 50-50. Maybe inside the Dolphins organization, they're seeing the Jets game. That's winnable without Tyreek because you got Dallas and Baltimore, Buffalo these next few weeks. We need him 100%. So it definitely felt like McDaniel was moving Waddle around more. He beat DJ Reed just straight up on a go route. DJ Reed being one of the better corners in the NFL. So it looked like his explosiveness was back, and he got banged up in that last game too. Took that huge hit over the middle of the field right at the start of the game. So possible that was impacting him as well. But I do fear once Tyreek Hill gets back in the game, he's again going to be the primary focus, as he should be. You know, he's the best receiver in football, so he should be getting those type of looks. But Jalen Waddle, I would like to see a bit more consistency because we know the shiftiness, the explosiveness, it's been on tape before. We haven't seen as much this season, but this game operating as the wide receiver one, he looked like his old self.
I only say where I agree with you. I think that you do cater the offense to Tyreek because he is the best receiver in the NFL. That being said, the offense has kind of not looked as dominant or as explosive as it once did early in the season when they were spreading the wealth, when we started to see Waddle and Tyreek both involved evenly. Of course, Mostert and a chain also getting theirs. But as the weeks have gone on and Tyreek's chance of getting 2,000 yards became more real, we started to see Waddle and his production not be that of what we saw at least last season, where Waddle and Tyreek were true 1A, 1B in the offense, where one was obviously Hill, but Waddle was still fantasy relevant. I think now with this game, hopefully it opens up McDaniel to the idea of, hey, we can still get Tyreek the Rock. We can still get him to this milestone potentially, but let's not make it a detriment to our offense where we're not that same vertical dominant force that we have shown to be in the past. But anyway, let's move on. Wide receiver 3, back from the dead. I feel like that's the theme of the wide receivers. Terry McLaurin goes from droppable to one of the best plays this week. And it's funny because before the matchup started, my brother Charles, he's in our dynasty league. He's right now he's in contention to move on to the semifinals. But he asked me, he goes, Drew, I don't know what to do, man. James Conner or Terry McLaurin. And I said to him, something about riding with your guys. You held on to Terry McLaurin all this time. You picked him up off waiver wires for $20, the best $20 you could have spent. Ride with your guy, see what he can do. At first, it didn't look good. 3 catches for 40-some yards with Sam Howell. They take Sam Howell out of the game. He finishes with 141 yards, almost 2 touchdowns, just short at the 1-yard line. And 6 catches, just an extremely efficient day. He was getting open at will. That was what I was expecting coming into the game. I don't respect the Rams secondary that much, where if they're going up against a high caliber receiver, they could have gotten theirs. Sam has been pretty great. And like you mentioned, for fantasy football, and like you mentioned, you thought it'd be a good matchup. So I believed in the same with Terry McLaurin. I did not expect it to be with Jacoby Brissett, where he would do a majority of his damage. So credit to Terry McLaurin for coming back, and it'd be interesting to see how Washington runs their offense next week against the Jets. Wide receiver 4, Chris Godwin, 10 catches, 155 yards. He was over 100 yards in the first half. He had himself a hell of a ball game, an extremely insane amount of targets, was able to get his, just missed that touchdown to put himself at that top spot, but still a great week from him regardless. Wide receiver 5, Cooper Kupp, back-to-back weeks. We see him over 100 yards, gets into the end zone, brings in all 8 of his targets. He was excellent today. My guy, Amon-Ra St. Brown, he couldn't take it easy on me on my birthday weekend. It's all right. I'll forgive him. That's my guy regardless. 7 catches on 9 targets, 112 yards, and a touchdown. They were just moving him all over the field. This is just your typical Amon-Ra game, and this was great to see, especially a week after he had one of his worst weeks of the season.
Absolutely. So moving on to the wide receiver duds. We got any more studs you want to go over? We're closing with Amon Ra.
You know what? The only one that I do want to acknowledge is Rashee Rice because we haven't seen a rookie thrive in an Andy Reid system since Deshaun Jackson in Philadelphia. But the last, let's say, 4 weeks,
Yep.
there's been
Month of season. Great.
no more fun player in fantasy to have than Rashee, for the idea that you got him for cheap. We had conversations early in the season like, keep an eye on Rashee. Don't know what he really can be, but there's someone that needs to step up. Maybe it could be Rashee. He shows flashes. Last 4 weeks, 25 fantasy points, 15, 19, and 24 fantasy points. He's gotten to the end zone 3 of the last 4 weeks. He has been the number one option for Patrick Mahomes, and we're probably looking at a league winner because you probably got him at such an insane discount. So that's the last one I want to acknowledge, where he once again is a top 10 fantasy finish.
Yeah, you saw the volume today too. 9 receptions for 91 yards. 9 receptions I know is a career high. I'm not
It
sure if
seems like
91 is.
I was going to say, listen,
Is
it
91
seems like
yards a
his
career high?
floor, his target, no, his career high was 107 against Las Vegas. But the last 4 weeks, 10 targets, 9 targets, 10 targets, 9. But you're right, career high in catches, 9 catches today.
And he's using the red zone a ton. Like he's damn near
Oh,
turned
yeah.
into a new Kelsey, where when they're in the red zone, they look for Rashee
Gave
Rice.
him that little shovel.
Moving on though to wide receiver duds, Stephon Diggs yet again is on this list. Wide receiver 39. Like I mentioned, Josh Allen had 7 completions. Stephon Diggs had 4 of those completions. So of course you're not happy with 4 receptions, but it was just a weird game for Josh Allen. I don't think there's gonna be many going forward where he has 7 completions. Does have the Chargers next week, so we could see a huge bounce back game
For sure.
for Stephon Diggs going up against one of the worst secondaries in the league. Brandon Ayuk, it felt like at this point it was damn near impossible for Ayuk to drop a stinker, but he did today. Just 37 receiving yards, fewest of the season. He had 8 straight weeks of double-digit fantasy points before this. He's a stud. You keep starting him. DeAndre Hopkins finished this week as wide receiver 75, only 2 catches for 21 yards following his huge game against Miami last week. Still saw 9 targets, still the clear number 1 option, and plays Seattle next week. So I'm still putting him out there. One thing to keep an eye on, though, is Will Levis got injured late into this game. Had a pretty nasty kind of the way his leg bent. He was able to walk it off, if I'm remembering correctly. So I don't know how serious it is. Of course, the Titans aren't really playing for anything at this point. But if Levis is healthy, DeAndre Hopkins is out there next week in Seattle is going to be a good matchup for him. Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 61. It's really impossible with this Jets offense because he has the huge game last week against Houston when Zach is back, but it feels like everything is dead. You know, he gets 14 targets last week. Now you feel confident starting him, but didn't get a target until the third quarter. Had some interesting comments after the game too about not getting the ball enough and not getting until that second half. Second lowest yardage total of the season with 29. The Jets offensive line was getting dominated all game. You know, like we could put this on Zach Wilson, but it was really the Jets offensive line was getting killed. At the end of the first quarter, maybe halfway through the second quarter, Zach was under pressure 80% of his dropbacks. Every single time he dropped back, there was someone in Zach Wilson's face. So the offense as a whole has struggled, but specifically today, this Dolphins defensive line just straight up dominated. Like I mentioned with Breece Hall, though, does have Washington next week, so I still think he's a flex play and a really good matchup. Drake London, wide receiver 69 in the week, 2 catches for 24 yards, 9 total touches for Drake London and Bijan Robinson. Not how I would run the Atlanta Falcons offense, but what do I know? I'm just someone with the podcast. I'm not Arthur Smith. If you date back all the way to week 6, so this is what feels like 2/3 of the season at this point, he's been one of the hardest players to predict, right? Going back to week 6, wide receiver 6, then he drops off wide receiver 30, wide receiver 44, gets banged up, misses week 9, comes back, wide receiver 51, has a bye week, wide receiver 29, wide receiver 83. Boom, he's back. Wide receiver 2 last week, wide receiver 70 this week. He's been so difficult. The talent is there. We're looking at a chance Arthur Smith gets let go if he doesn't win the division, and a chance they change at quarterback. Drake London, like I said, the talent is there. The situation he's in right now, though, is not a good one for fantasy football. A couple of other players who, again, maybe didn't bust completely, but disappointing days. DJ Moore, 4 receptions for 52 yards.
For sure.
Decent day, but he'd been a top 10 receiver for 3 weeks straight. He has been on fire with Justin Fields, so a bit disappointing. Puka, 5 for 50. You live with it, but you see Cooper Kupp go crazy. You get a little jealous there. Jamar Chase, 4 for 64 is fine, but he did leave early with that shoulder injury. I don't know if we have an exact injury designation, maybe AC sprain or something.
It was an
Zach Taylor did
AC
day to
sprain.
day. AC sprain. Zach Taylor did say he's day to day. The Bengals are fighting for a playoff spot with that win. It feels 50-50 if he's going to play right now. Of course, that doesn't just affect Jamar. That affects Jake Browning, T. Higgins, the entire offense. They were able to get that win without him. But, of course, when he's on the field, it changes everything. And then, as I mentioned to start off the show, Zay Flowers, Odell Beckham. I think these were two of the better starts going into this week. I would have been very high on both of these guys,
For sure.
but combined for 2 catches for 21 yards. So probably looking both of them as bench pieces going forward. They do play San Francisco next week, so probably won't start them there.
Let me say this. Going into the tight end studs, it was the week of the tight end. Tight ends have been getting themselves into the end zone, and this tight end studs list is pretty fun. Number 1, unfortunately, but fortunately, because I had a feeling he would do this. Sam Laporta finishes as your tight end 1, 3 touchdowns, 56 yards. Just absolutely gashed the Broncos, and especially when it came to the end zone, he was finding that, no doubt. David Njoku, your start of the week, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
10 catches, 104 yards, and a touchdown. Absolutely went bonkers. Had himself a great ball game against Chicago. Trey McBride goes and finishes as your tight end 3. My guy by association. 10 catches, 11 receptions, 102 yards. Listen, this was my sit of the week. I think he's matchup proof at this point. Doesn't matter if he's going up against Fred Warner.
He got hurt
this guy's must.
He
did. He did get hurt, and he did come back in. He had a couple nice snags too. His attitude that he plays with too. He always wants more. He's looking just to be one of the best players on the field, knows he holds himself to a standard. I like this guy, Trey McBride, no doubt about it. He has something about him that makes me excited about the tight end position. Hunter Henry, 2 touchdowns today. That was only one. One got called back. I apologize. 1 touchdown, 66 yards on 7 catches, 9 targets. Had himself a great ball game. Isaiah Likely, he was the only one, like we mentioned, to really do something in the pass game for the Baltimore Ravens. 5 catches, 6 targets, 70 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Kraft also gets into the end zone. This is your tight end 6 for the Green Bay Packers. Surprising. Well, Musgrave's been out. This guy Kraft's been able to do a job. And then really the last one worth mentioning, top 10, Hawkinson, of course, 63 yards, doesn't get into the end zone, but has himself 12 fantasy points. Jake Ferguson, somehow, some way, finishes with 10 fantasy points. A lot of garbage time, which was able to salvage not just CD, but, of course, Jake, where for the longest he was sitting at a goose for me, but then finishes with double digits in PPR league. So you couldn't be too upset about it.
Only have a couple for the tight end duds. Travis Kelce, though, has to be the biggest one. 5 catches for 26 yards. Dropped a pretty easy touchdown that just felt like it was footsteps that he was hearing and kind of got just, short arm the ball.
Got scared.
It was right on his hands.
Queen was in the
stands.
Dropped
it. Yeah, she wasn't happy about it either.
She wasn't.
Listen, Travis Kelce, he just doesn't look right. Is it the age? Is it the injuries? I mean, early week 3, week 4, he had a huge game against, maybe it was Denver where he had like 100 yards in the first half. Yeah. Yep. So he's still had moments this year. I know it feels like a lifetime ago. He still had moments this year where he's looked like Travis Kelce, but at least for this last month, 6 weeks of the season, he hasn't looked like that type of dude. Even still, he's probably still the tight end I want the most just because of the consistency week in and week out and usage in the offense with Patrick Mahomes. But that vintage Kelce game we haven't seen in a while. George Kittle has a huge catch, but only goes 2 for 57. Overall, not terrible, but we're expecting a little bit more. Of course, Brock Purdy, that offense scores 4 touchdowns. You like to get 1 for Kittle. Evan Ingram finished with 4 receptions for 28 yards. He was the top 5 tight end coming into this week, so a bit disappointing. Then lastly, Kyle Pitts, 3 for 37. Kyle Pitts has kind of been in there, but I feel like we always have to mention him because he's always our sit of the week.
Take a side legend.
But again, Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, these are all guys you have to incorporate in your offense more. Arthur Smith says, no, why would I do that? Give the ball to Jonnu Smith, Tyler Algier, and fucking Cordell Patterson.
Only thing I'll say in defense, it was pissing rain. It was a torrential downpour over there in Carolina, but that's
Bijan,
not an excuse.
London,
none.
Okay.
Zero.
Yeah.
Zero excuse. Bijan should have got the ball 30 times. For him to not even see, barely, did he even touch double-digit attempts? I feel like that's not even double-digit touches. Yeah, I was going to say, this was an all-time dud laid by Arthur Smith. And before this week, there were conversations saying that Arthur Smith's looking to retain his job with the fact that they're in position to potentially win the division. And then you go and you don't even score a touchdown against the worst team in the league. So to me, Arthur definitely put himself back on the hot seat, and it's seeming as if he will not be the coach next year. Now, let's move on to the last part of the show. And before we do that, let's stop and take a break. Hey, like the stream if you haven't already. If you guys are watching for this long, go ahead and drop a like on the video. It helps us out a lot. If you aren't subscribed to the channel, come on. What are you doing? Subscribe to the channel. Turn on that notification bell so you know when we go live like nights like tonight. We go live Sundays, Thursdays. That's just what we do with the fantasy reaction. And then, of course, we're going live with Pick a Side. I think we're going live on Tuesday, and then we'll be back for our basketball episode on Friday. But let's move on to the last part, the waiver wire section. Now, I'm going to skip over the quarterbacks. I don't think that there's really any worthwhile unless you're interested in a Nick Mullins, unless you're interested in an Easton Stick. You tell me.
No, thank you.
Didn't think
If
so.
you made it far in the season, I hope you're not looking at one of these guys. You should have a better option.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire, does he pique your interest, sir?
Pacheco, I feel like has a decent chance of coming back this week because this would be the third week, right? So if that was the case, just put him on IR. If things can be out that much longer. So with Pacheco expected to be back, they've both been, him and McKinnon have been solid these last 2 weeks,
For sure.
mostly in the passing game, getting touchdowns as well. But I think Pacheco will be back, so not interested in Clyde.
Now, we saw Zamir White have himself a solid fantasy football game, 16 fantasy points. Does he intrigue you?
He does because there's a chance Josh Jacobs is still out. They do have the long rest. They played on Thursday, so he'll have 10 days rest instead of 7 days. The Raiders also kind of are playing for stuff. Like they have an outside chance for the wild card, so Josh Jacobs has some incentive to play. He's someone that I put it like if you have any fab at this point, might as well spend it if you need a running back start. But again, if you're in the semifinals of the playoffs, there's a decent chance you already have a better option available.
Dontavian Wicks, where he finishes today with 97 receiving yards on 6 catches, is he entering your matrix?
He's kind of been flex-worthy type of thought for me for a few weeks now because the receiving he's always kind of hovered around 40, 50 yards today. He had, pretty sure this is most of his career, 97 yards. But again, a very low-end flex play, like a wide receiver 4 type of guy. So, if you had an injury or maybe you can move someone to IR and have an open roster spot, I'd be okay picking up Wicks.
Now, for 3 straight weeks, Demarcus Robinson has had double-digit fantasy points. Next week has New Orleans, and week 17 has the Giants. Does he pique your interest at all?
I'm not buying it. Okay.
I understand.
Good
3
for
straight
him,
weeks of double digits.
I'm just not.
For deeper leagues, I definitely would be interested in that one just for the idea of he seems to be consistent 3 straight weeks. New Orleans defense isn't this world beater either. So at the same time, you're seeing attention being drawn to Puka. Obviously, Cooper's getting his attention. They're forgetting about DeMarcus, and Matthew Stafford's not forgetting about him, and he's getting to the end zone. I think in deeper leagues, definitely worth a play, but I'm with you in a 10-man. Maybe you look elsewhere. Josh Palmer, in case he's available in your leagues, he's only rostered in 39% of leagues. If he's available, I think you should go out and get him for the idea. Keenan's banged up. Of course, QJ, if you like him or not, regardless, Josh Palmer with Keenan Allen not on the field, Josh Palmer will be the wide receiver 1. But if Keenan Allen's on the field, then, of course, I don't know if he's start worthy, but in deeper leagues wouldn't be the worst idea. But I hope you have better options than Josh Palmer at this point, especially if you're in the fantasy playoffs. But other than that, are you back in on Hunter Henry for tight ends?
Yeah, he's always, capable of scoring a touchdown. And Bailey Zappi, I thought, looked kind of decent. He had a really nice play that didn't count where he was like rolling to his left and kind of threw it across his body early in the first or second quarter. But yeah, he's someone that tight ends could get thin outside of those top 7 or 8 guys if you had an injury or something. So worth picking up if you need a bit of a desperation start next week.
And Mr. Dells, that's going to do it from us over here at the Fantasy Reaction Show. Again, like I mentioned, if you guys haven't already dropped a like on the video, go ahead and do that for us. It helps us out a lot, and we appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already subscribed. This is going to do it from episode 29 of the Fantasy Reaction Show, and we will see you guys next time.